Hi, my name is Francie Tanner, and I'm the Director of the Americas of Panagenda. And today I want to talk to you about one of our solutions called MarvelClient that helps you reduce the TCO of your IBM Lotus Notes environment. But before we do that, I want to introduce you to Panagenda in general. What we do is we design solutions around optimizing your IBM Lotus Notes client infrastructure. We help you dealing with your applications as well as monitor servers of any kind and optimize. Right now we have about 32 partners worldwide serving 4 million licensed module users in over 70 countries. Our largest customer, by the way, is 140,000 users, so we have a very good track record when it comes to scalability and efficiency. Now, before I tell you all about MarvelClient, I actually want to set the stage by explaining a little bit more about IBM Lotus Notes client management in general. Our client management challenge actually doesn't start today with a perfect environment. It started when you first set up Lotus Notes in your environment. Now, depending on when you actually got Notes, what your environment looks like today is the result of doing several upgrades, maybe doing some directory changes, client type changes, moving from single user client to shared workstation, something like that. Odds are there's a significant number of outdated or wrong templates or IDs all over your client infrastructure. At the same time, you were rolling out new apps and at the same time decommissioning applications. So what that means is you have icons, you have bookmarks that were added, but probably never removed as you went to decommission those. Same thing for local replicas. Odds are your users created local replicas pretty much wherever they felt like that may or may not have been updated, that got abandoned, recreated, but probably never removed. Again, we're talking about local apps on mapped drives, outside a data directory, inside a data directory, whatever it is. Meanwhile, you also had some server and user changes. What that means is you probably did at some point some kind of server consolidation, server name changes, anything like that, which basically has the effect of leaving orphaned client pointers all over your workstations. End user name changes, moves, stuff like that ends up leaving wrong location documents, connection documents, maybe even wrong catalog NSF entries or home server entries, and the effects of those are really quite significant for your end users. Now let's talk about Notes 8, which is when we got a whole lot of really great functionality, but what basically happened is we went from a version 7 client, which had basically a few hundred files, to now all of a sudden we have 17,000 files with Eclipse in the Notes program directory and 1,800 subdirectories. We have 3,000 files in the workspace directory with 2,400 subdirectories, and most of those are actually empty. So in total, we're not only talking about outdated and wrong information on your clients that was there before, but when you lay version 8 of Notes on top of that, you're really multiplying the issue by having a much larger footprint on your clients, which then of course impacts you as you're doing moves and changes along the way. Add to that, Notes 8 has approximately 80 preference dialogues, and each of those has about 15 settings. So what we're talking about is 1,200 settings that your users and or you can or cannot control that are sprayed across your local address book, the Notes INI, your XML files, and that does not include any plugins, widgets, or add-ons that your users have. So when we talk about how to manage this sort of infrastructure with native tools, really all that's available are policies. Policies are great. I think everyone should use policies. However, there's a couple of things that you need to be aware of. First of all, policies depend on an already functioning client setup. Some of the things we mentioned earlier with having wrong location document entries, things like that, having issues with the dollar policies view in the local address book, those are all things that can impact whether your users get policies at all. In my experience, you're looking about a 75% or so success rate, meaning 75% of your users actually get policies and the rest of your users don't. Another challenge, of course, is, well, okay, so that's a pretty good success rate actually, and maybe I can live with that, but tell me which users are getting policies and which users don't, which is one of the biggest issues with policies, is that you can't actually see what's going on, who's getting policies and who's not. So you're forced to do client management in the dark, rolling out changes that you don't actually know whether they take effect. Policies also aren't very good at adapting to your user's unique situation. So traveling users, VPN, Citrix users, if you say create a new local replica, a policy will just do that regardless of whether it makes sense to the user or not. Another challenge policies have is that they're not terribly predictable. I can't tell you exactly when a policy is going to kick in or when it's not. And also, most settings cannot be unset once you set them. Now, you can stop setting them from that point forward, but depending on what it is, you may not be unset a setting once it's done. And lastly, policies typically cannot repeat actions. So while they may allow you to control a couple of things on a one-time basis, if the user changes machine or if the user undoes what you just did, odds are policies can't repeat that action and keep the settings standardized. So one of the biggest challenges with client management actually starts really before you start managing anything. It starts when you have to inventory your Notes client landscape. But what does having true transparency over your Notes client environment really mean? Well, having a good Notes client inventory tells you what is out there. What client types, hardware details, memory that's present, configuration details, things like that. A good client inventory also tells you the difference between what you expected and what actually exists. There's never any guesswork required here. This should always show you up-to-date information at all times. A good client inventory also shows you opportunities for improvement. So who exactly does have outdated icons and bookmarks pointing to servers that haven't been up and running in years? A good client inventory also tells you opportunities for improvement with regards to client performance. Now, we actually gave a presentation at Lotusphere about this, and ODS is one of the #1 factors that impacts your Notes client performance. Another thing a client inventory should tell you is how healthy the client infrastructure actually is, and what exactly needs to be fixed or standardized. A good client inventory also tells you who has which icons, which bookmarks, which local replicas. And this coincidentally also actually proves that Notes may be used much more heavily than previously assumed. Now, before I show you the MarvelClient Analyze database, I actually want to explain the MarvelClient architecture real quick. It's really quite simple. What we're talking about is one single DLL or SO or dylib file, because we work on all platforms that Notes supports. So it's one single DLL on the local workstation, as well as two Notes INI entries. Basically, we hook into the extension manager line, and then we deploy one line that points the end user to the appropriate MarvelClient config database. Now on the server, and you can see this in the diagram on the right, all that's required are two databases. There's no tasks, add-ins, anything like that on the server. The MarvelClient config database is where all the actions are stored that your Notes clients are going to execute. And the Analyze database is what I'm going to show you next, which is where we store the Lotus Notes inventory. Now let me show you what our client inventory actually looks like in Notes. So here you see the MarvelClient config database and the MarvelClient Analyze database. Within the MarvelClient Analyze database, you'll find that we collect over 200 unique configuration points for each user. For example, we can tell you who is operating under which operating system, who is which kind of hardware type, so desktop machines, laptop machines, Citrix, things like that. We can tell you geographically by IP address who is coming from where, East Coast, West Coast. Very important, of course, we can tell you who has which kind of client installed, standard versus basic, admin and designer client versus just a Notes client. We also, of course, know who has which particular release, including fixed pack of Notes, and who's using a single user versus multi-user install. Perhaps even more importantly, one of the things that we can tell you is where exactly Notes is installed. What I'm looking at here is a fairly small environment actually, but even within that you have a large number of different variations of where Notes is installed, which is very representative of what our customers see out there. So you have people with Notes installed in C IBM, C Lotus, C Program Files, C Temp, D, all kinds of non-standardized locations. Same for the data directory, we tell you where exactly your users are storing their data. Same for Notes INIs, we can tell you where your users have their Notes INIs, or if they have more than one Notes INI, which Notes does not appreciate very much. Another thing we do is we do a runtime analysis of all your Notes clients. So what that means is we can finally define what exactly your users mean when they say Notes is slow. Because in reality, me saying Notes is slow and maybe an executive admin saying Notes is slow may mean two completely different things. So we take out all the guesswork and we tell you exactly how long Notes is taking to launch, how long Notes is taking after login, and of course in total. And then we break that down into different categories, so anything that's over 8 seconds are users that you may need to look at. Of course, now that we know which of your users truly have a slow Notes client, the question of course is what exactly is causing that, which is something we can also help with. One of the things that factors into client performance, of course, is network latency. So we analyze latency and tell you exactly how much latency your users are experiencing while connecting to their home server. And even something as little as 100 milliseconds of latency may really impact your user's performance. Now we can also tell you who is working off a local mail replica and who's working off a server-based replica. We inventory every single icon and bookmark that your users have on their workspace. This allows you to see exactly which pointers your users have to things that haven't existed in years and need to be cleaned up. Now, of course, you can look at this information in different views. I'm just highlighting a few of them here. We also analyze local databases for all your users, both for the relative path, which means within the data directory, and the absolute path, which means outside of the data directory. Not only can we tell you which local replicas and databases your users have, but we can also tell you where, how big they are, the ODS, what design they're based on, the path, things like that. Now this may actually be a very interesting view for a lot of you, specifically those that may have to abide by very strict security regulations. So an end user creating a unauthorized local archive in something like a Dropbox folder, maybe even worse, the database is not encrypted, may be a big problem. And of course, the first step to solving all these problems is actually understanding what kind of issues you do have. As I mentioned earlier, we can show you all databases your users have by ODS. And speaking of ODS, this is actually a huge contributor towards having Notes client perform slowly. So being able to understand who has ODS 20 applications, which can add several seconds to your Notes client startup time, is very important, especially, of course, as we're looking to resolve these issues. Now we also inventory all users' Notes INI. You can look at this information by user, by the actual Notes INI entry, as well as by preference. You may be very interested in which of your users are encrypting all their saved mail, things like that. We also inventory the ECL. You can look at this by user or by entry, which typically is a little bit more interesting. And what you'll see in a production environment is very much like what we're looking at here, which is a hodgepodge of all kinds of entries in the ECL that are a security risk. Now, MarvelClient also inventories all ID files, including certifiers, expiration dates. So for the first time, you'll also be able to understand who has which certifiers, who's not getting prompted for passwords, has SSO turned on, things like that. One of the capabilities of MarvelClient is to deploy even huge files to end users over time in a throttled way, where we're not impacting your network or your end user productivity. So if you're using the Smart File Downloader functionality, we can also tell you the status of that download across your user base. Another feature MarvelClient comes with is the ability to clean up local databases and replicas. So what that means is you can deploy an action that says anything that hasn't replicated in a certain amount of time, anything that hasn't been used in a certain time, either move those databases to a particular location or delete them, and while you're at it, disable replication. So if you deployed any action like that, we can also tell you the results of that here in the MarvelClient Analyze database. Another thing we optionally collect are user location, connection, account, and certificates. This actually goes a long way towards understanding what kind of wrong information your users currently have in their location documents. Same thing for your connections. We very frequently find low priority connection documents pointing to outdated IP addresses, which can contribute greatly to nodes performance as well as support calls. We can also give you an overview of your hardware and software that the nodes clients are running on, so we can tell you who has admin rights and who doesn't. Also factoring into client performance, of course, are CPU and memory information. So understanding who exactly is trying to run a standard client with only 500 megs of RAM goes a long way towards making your end user's experience with Lotus Notes a whole lot better. And we can also tell you about drives, hardware that's installed locally, as well as particular software that the users may be running that may be even conflicting with the Lotus Notes installs, such as antivirus programs. Now that you understand what exactly MarvelClient Analyze tells you, let's talk about how to fix some of the problems that we just found. Without something like MarvelClient in a typical help desk model pictured on the left there, what you're doing is you're finding an issue and you're then responding to it. But if 1,000 users have a particular issue, you're forced to deal with that 1,000 times. There's no economies of scale going on there. Since we can not only fix but standardize environments with MarvelClient, what that means is we can fix and prevent help desk calls from happening at all. This means you not only can reduce the number of help desk calls by up to 80%, but of course you're saving time and effort on managing Lotus Notes at all. MarvelClient is made up of 7 different modules, and it's up to you to pick and choose whichever ones you need to manage your environment. We have the Analyze modules, which helps you understand your nodes infrastructure, which is what we just saw. The Migrate module helps you do mass changes for consolidations, cleanups, mergers, things like that. The Manage module can help you configure your particular nodes client in exactly the way that you want and then enforce that configuration, including Eclipse pieces. Our Real-Time module gives you intelligent server connectivity specifically for traveling users, Citrix users, and global environments. MarvelClient Roaming allows you to intelligently roam your users with up to 90% less data and network traffic. Our Upgrade module allows you to do touchless and intelligent upgrades of both the nodes client, same-time embedded pieces, or anything in between. And lastly, our Zip, Unzip, and File Blocking module allows you to save a significant amount of network traffic and disk space. Let's go back in Notes so I can show you what that actually looks like. So I'm opening my MarvelClient config database. And before I go into any particular actions, let me show you a list of things that we can manage. So we can run any agent, programs, we could do mass changes across the enterprise, manage workspace pages, deploy local icons and replicas. We can manage replicator page entries, full text indexes, bookmark folders as well as bookmarks, notes INIs and variables, ECLs, location and connection documents, toolbars as well as profile documents. We also have the ability to deploy files, whether that is a small file you can deploy with file deployment or a large upgrade file you can roll out with the Smart File Downloader. We also back up and monitor nodes configurations and then of course do the reverse, which is roaming or rollback. And we can do many cleanup operations such as compacting the desktop. We can also manage and roll out some user preferences, some location settings, eclipse pieces, as well as do cleanup operations on the local machine. Now, as you can see here, any MarvelClient action can be executed whenever it makes sense. So we can execute things before login, after login, on first server access, which means about a minute into the node's client session, in real time, which means we can dynamically relocate or restrict end users based on VPN versus LAN connectivity, based on geography, and we can execute things at shutdown. Now let me show you some of the things we can do with MarvelClient. We currently ship with 104 example actions. This makes it very easy for you to get started. For example, you have a Citrix environment you want to manage. Here's everything you need to know to seamlessly deal with your Citrix users or even roam from nodes into Citrix and vice versa. Or maybe you're interested in cleaning up some of the issues that we just saw in the MarvelClient Analyze database. You can very easily deal with things like location management, clean up your ECLs, or delete outdated local replicas. Even if you're not using MarvelClient roaming, we can help you deal with your IBM roaming users, manage locations, signatures, things like that. Or maybe you saw a whole bunch of icons and bookmarks and maybe even local replica settings in the MarvelClient Analyze database that you want to clean up. Here's everything you need to get started to delete outdated links, redirect icons and bookmarks, and replicator page entries from one server to another. We can also help you optimize your Lotus Notes clients by dynamically adapting to things like low bandwidth situations, or by upgrading the ODS of all your local databases. We can also help you with things like security, skinning, which is what you saw earlier on my workstation, or synchronized contacts. Let's take a look at some of these actions so I can show you how they work. One very powerful feature of MarvelClient is the ability to heal a node's client if it becomes damaged. For example, if the end user clicks on a bookmark and removes it by mistake, MarvelClient has the ability to put that bookmark back upon next startup. Let me show you. This is one of our example actions that refer to the mail bookmark. You can of course select where exactly in the bookmark bar it should be. And as with any MarvelClient action, you can say whether this is a one-time only or 2 or 3 or 4 times only action, or if this is a persistent action that needs to take place at every client start. So what that means is next time I restart my Notes client, my bookmark icon will automatically go back exactly where it was supposed to be. Let's take a look at another self-healing action, which is the deployment of a local mail file replica. Now I said local mail file replica, but in reality this can actually be referring to any particular database that you wish to roll out, such as a mobile directory catalog. Now MarvelClient can help you not only roll out the particular action, but make sure that the icons are pointing to the appropriate servers while removing links that you don't want the user to have. You could do things like select the topmost icon in the stack, and if you wish to actually create a local replica, you can say how and do this in an intelligent way that doesn't cause conflict if the user already has a local replica of their mail file or if they have an outdated local replica. This type of desktop action can also manage how the replica behaves on the replicator page, what position on the replicator page this local replica should take, and exactly what it should point to and how it should behave. You can of course also manage the full text index, manage how this icon behaves on the bookmark bar like I showed you earlier. And again, since we're able to apply these actions persistently, what that means is even if the end user deletes the local replica, this action will automatically recreate it. Also, if the user comes on the replicator page and unchecks replication, or perhaps sets it to replicate with a wrong server, or in the wrong direction, this kind of action can heal any sort of problem the end user may be accidentally creating. But even better, MarvelClient is able to apply conditions to any action. Let me explain what this means. As you saw earlier, we already know everything about your users, where they're installed, where they're located, and what kind of client they're running. So what that means is we can turn any of those things and more into conditions that say, only do this if the user does not have a certain version of Notes, only do this if they have a certain amount of disk space, if they're on the LAN, VPN, have a certain amount of memory, are running a certain operating system, or have a certain type of workstation. Now let me show you a couple of more conditions that can be applied to any MarvelClient action. For example, you can create a time condition that runs a certain action on a certain day or date of the month, or even between a certain time. What this means is you can use a condition such as this and apply it to an action that deploys an upgrade file or maybe helps you with a server move. You can also create IP range conditions that allow you to identify the geographical parts of your company, such as West Coast users, people in Germany, East Coast users, and anything in between. This means you can intelligently do things like deploying local replicas pointing to the appropriate server, or just redirect users' icons, bookmarks, and replicator page entries to the geographically closest servers. You can also create a number of different strength conditions. For example, if in the Notes INI the setup equals line is empty. What this means is that you can set up what you consider to be the perfect Notes client with all the bookmarks exactly where you want, with all the different workspace pages as well as icons, with all the local replicas and replicator page entries pointed and set up exactly the way you want, and location and connection documents set up exactly how you wish. And you can then automatically and transparently have all those MarvelClient actions execute while being tied to a condition such as this. Lastly, you can also use a number of numeric conditions. For example, regarding a particular Notes version, fixed pack, amount of memory present, disk space, anything like that. So in this example, what we were doing is rolling out a new local replica, which makes sense except if the user is in a Citrix session. So using conditions in fact allows you to not have to worry about lists of users that may or may not be using Citrix, but you can merely say don't do this for anyone that is in Citrix right now, and MarvelClient will automatically and transparently adapt to each user's unique situation. The combination between using flexible and intelligent settings along with intelligent conditions and persistence means MarvelClient can not only seamlessly fix your environment, but keep it standardized 365 days of the year. Now let me show you something else that will help you get rid of all those outdated client pointers. This is a very easy action that allows you to simply get rid of any icon, bookmark, or replicator page entry pointing to this particular server name. In this case, we chose to delete, but you can also use this action to change and move a particular application, server, or replica ID to the top of the stack. Just move it to the top of the stack or change it. Now in this case we selected delete, but you can also use an action like this to change and redirect outdated servers and applications. And of course you can do this on a server by server basis or by a directory basis. Or if you're just moving a particular application, you can also do this by replica ID or file name. This kind of action will go out across every single user's workspace, bookmarks, replicator page entry, and redirect whatever it is you want to clean up or possibly migrate. We can also do operations in real time, meaning when people move from one building to another, or perhaps for traveling users, when they move from the East Coast to the West Coast. And based on where they are at the time, we can redirect their icons, bookmarks, replicator page entries. To do this, we move back into conditions where you can define by IP range what it means to be considered East Coast users, West Coast users, or maybe just people on VPN. But in this case, I'm only redirecting people that are actually connected on the East Coast to a particular set of servers. Or you can also use real-time restriction to restrict database access, for example for VPN users, or database creation or deletion, which makes perfect sense for your Citrix users. This is an example of a backup action which can be used to merely back up users' nodes configuration so they can then be rolled onto new hardware, or you can use this to actually roam nodes. All you have to do is define where exactly you want to back up or roam the end user's information, whether that is a Domino database or a network directory. Depending on what you're using this for, you can of course keep more than one revision. If you're using this to backup, you may wish to keep 2 or 3 revisions so you can roll back a user and restore their node's configuration from the way it was a week ago. What you see here below is where we upload everything that is needed to actually roam a Notes Eclipse user. So here we have the Notes configuration, we have the workspace right here translated into XML, which is a mere kilobytes. We have the users, icon, images, bookmarks, notes INI, all their IDs, names NSF, journal, user dictionary, and a number of Eclipse workspace files. And in order to do this efficiently, we zip all the information before we upload it, or of course do the reverse as we download it. This means you can roam even Eclipse users in anywhere between 2 to 4 megabytes of data, which is a huge savings compared to traditional notes roaming. Of course, you can adapt any of these documents, add files to them, remove files as you wish. You saw me using conditions earlier, so if you're only looking to roam Citrix users, there's no need to maintain a list of who that is. You can merely say, if the user is in a Citrix client, then go ahead and do this. If you wish to specify who exactly that is, you're free to do so as well. Now let me show you one last action. One of the most frequent support calls have to do with wrong or outdated location documents. So there's a number of ways we can help. Included right here as an example is a way for you to manage all online locations for all users. Now of course you could also make this a wildcard and manage all locations for all your users. Since your users point to different servers and your users have different internet mail addresses, what we do here is simply deploy a lookup variable which causes the Notes client to go ask in the server-based directory, tell me what my internet mail address is supposed to be, tell me what my home server is supposed to be, what my domain and mail file is supposed to be, and then populate that. Now, of course, you can set everything else such as ports and replication as well, but this is a perfect example of a persistent action that you would want to deploy across all your users at every client start. This will allow you to not only fix location documents that are wrong or outdated from a previous server or user move, but this also allows you to prevent ever having to answer support calls for wrong location documents. Now I would love to show you more actions, but let me wrap up with a MarvelClient summary. As you were able to see, MarvelClient allows you to configure what you consider to be the perfect Notes client for a user in HR, for a user in finance, for users on the East Coast versus the West Coast, including for brand new machines, which means MarvelClient can not only set up workstations from the very first time without manual intervention, but they can also keep those configurations consistent and standardized over the life of the Notes client for all your users. Doing things like renaming users and servers or consolidating servers is a breeze, since MarvelClient can automatically and transparently adjust all your users' Lotus Notes settings accordingly. This allows our customers to realize an 80 to 90% decrease in administration effort when it comes to Lotus Notes. But we can help even when dealing with new projects such as migrations, upgrades, consolidations, mergers, or recertification, and we can help you save up to 70% of time and effort when dealing with such projects. As you were able to see, we have a number of ways that help you reduce a significant amount of disk space storage as well as bandwidth by automating attachment compression, restricting users intelligently, as well as doing efficient roaming. What this all boils down to, though, is you're finally able to present your end users with a predictable notes environment that has the ability to heal itself with only a client restart. And with being able to increase Notes startup time by up to 70%, this means happier end users, less frustration, and significantly less support calls. In short, MarvelClient not only allows you to fix your current environment, but also keep it standardized, as well as cope with new projects, including adding new IBM functionality to your existing Notes environment. We appreciate the time you spent today, and we look forward to your questions or feedback.